My name is Thomas Jochen Critchley, and together with Maria Muradas Taylor, who is somewhere here as well, we've been convening the Language Teaching Forum since 2015. And our main activity is to organize a series of workshops on language teaching, language education, and scholarship, 3 workshops per year. You can find recordings and materials of previous events on our webpage at the Department of Language and Linguistic Science at York. I will post the link here in the chat if you're interested. You can browse and see whether you find relevant and interesting materials there. And before I move to the workshop today, I also would like to announce our following workshop and the last one of this year on 28th of June. Karen Riesacher from Roskilde in Denmark will lead a workshop on what lingua cultures are we teaching, lingua culture, transnationality, and power. And again, if you are interested and want to put that in your diary, I'll put a link to a poster there. It will go live soon on our website as well, but you can have already advanced information on this. Now to today, today's workshop, Embodied Interculturality in the Language class, is the second installment of this year's series, which we have put under the theme of inter/transculturality. And it's with really great pleasure that we have finally managed to organize this session with Donata. Some of you might remember we've first already tried to organize this and nearly finalized everything in March 2020, but then had to cancel due to COVID. And then again earlier this year in March, we tried again and failed because of the industrial action. But now today I'm really looking forward to have Donata here and to the workshop, which has a really exciting title and content. So it's really great to have Donata here. Donata is a senior lecturer in language and intercultural education and also program director at the Modern Language Center at King's College London. And she's there also responsible for staff development in intercultural training. She has an extensive teaching experience in second language acquisition, intercultural studies, and applied linguistics. And one of the foci is using cinema and literature in language teaching. Before joining King's College, Donata worked with the University of Venice and Roma 3 in Italy. She also worked for the Italian Cultural Institute in London, where she, amongst other things, co-founded teacher training for Italian as a foreign language. So she's very much invested and engaged in professional development. So we couldn't have a better workshop leader today. Currently, Donata is completing a PhD in doctorate in education, I should say, on language teachers' professional development, with a particular focus on identity and life narratives, with an onto-epistemological framework broadly grounded in posthumanism, new materialism, and autoethnography. That's a mouthful. I have seen and heard some of her work in an earlier presentation a few years ago, and I think this will also inform some of the workshop today. I should also say that Donata is also an accredited psychoanalytic psychotherapist and a member of the British Psychoanalytic Association, and she works privately on a part-time basis as a psychotherapist in London. So we have one who is really excellently qualified to lead this workshop today, and without further ado, I hand over to Donata. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for reading about me. Maybe I should have sent you a shorter biography because we took 10 minutes of our workshop for my biography, but thank you. And yes, we had to postpone the workshop twice, so I'm very happy and pleased to be here with you today. And the workshop, there is a lot of theory, but also an application of the theory. And the main aim, I think, from my point of view, is trying to challenge and deconstruct a bit notion of intercultural education that we see in every single syllabus that deal with intercultural teaching, with a lot of frameworks, starting from Hofstede and so on. So this workshop, it's a bit different. I hope maybe it's confusing, maybe it's giving you interesting ideas. I don't know. We'll see. But feel free to stop me or ask for any question or put in the chat any question that you might have. And if you like to speak up, it would be nice if you put the camera on, because we are speaking about embodiment. So it's nice to see you on the screen if you're going to speak. And because we are speaking on embodiment and grounding where we are, I just want to share with you where I am. You see from my background, I am at home, but I am located in London. And of course, you know where London is, but just wanted to give you a quick, grounding of where I'm based and work. And I work at King's College. If you're familiar with King's College, there are 5 campuses across London, and I'm based at the Strand campus. So a little bit of grounding and embodiment and location. And here is who I am. And I'm not going to spend more about myself because Thomas already said who I am. But I also, because that's part of the workshop and of the ideas today, I also want to give you another image of who I am. I'm also this person here. A middle-aged, middle-class white woman. That's how I define myself. I have dark brown hair, brown-green eyes. I'm fairly tall, not slim, nor fat. I am Italian, from the Dolomites in north of Italy. I love sport, cooking, art, cinema. I am a mother, a sister, a daughter, and a friend. And I am a little bit disruptive, subversive, and committed to make of my job a meaningful expression of myself. And I have multiple identities, as all of us, and I'm situated across many disciplines. So I think this is very important to ground the workshop. And here are some images of who I am, where I come from, with my mother, my father, my Dolomites, and myself as a little child. And hopefully you will understand more of what this is meaningful. It's not just to focus on myself, but to introduce the idea of what I'm discussing today with the notion of embodiment and personal narratives. So the aims is to discuss, and also I warn you before starting, a lot of my writing on the slide is on the right side, so you might want to change your view of Zoom. If you have all the faces on the right, you might want to change it on the top, because otherwise you cannot read much of what I'm saying. So the focus is discussing the importance of objects and materialities and embodiments and in interculturality. And my research, but also my teaching, is grounded into posthumanism and new materialism. I don't know if you're familiar with these theories, and I will introduce and discuss them a little bit today. So maybe they sparkle your interest, or maybe they are alien and you don't want to engage with. But I will touch upon them because they are informing my practices, not only my research. So I think it's impossible not to touch upon these theoretical backgrounds. Then we have a couple of activities during the workshop, and then I hope also time for discussing and having your opinion as well. So I would like you to do a little bit of thinking and already some actions on Padlet. I have posted already the link on the chat. And just put your ideas of what you think, how you interpret embodied interculturality. I'm sure we all know how to use Padlet, so I'm not sharing it on the screen because I don't want to stop sharing my slides and then resharing. And we can all look at Padlet on your screen, and maybe just post for 1 minute or two what you understand with embodied interculturality, or what's your gut idea. And And maybe Thomas, you can read some of the posts for me if you like, so that I don't change screens. Thank you. If anybody would also like to speak up, you're welcome to do, we take a couple of minutes and to do this activity. Thomas, would you like to read any posts? I cannot hear you.
Sorry. Yes. New for me, I'm curious. Intercultural encounters have a physical dimension. Intercultural immersion, sensual experiences. Teaching culture for multi-purpose goals, raising awareness, understanding the nature of language learning through delight. Curiosity, involving the senses.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Yes, it's involving the senses for sure, the body, the materiality of learning and teaching and sharing experiences also with the learners and with the environment as well. That's why I started with where I am located. And I leave the Padlet alive. So if you want to post also throughout the session or at the end of the session after, to just carry on the conversation. So very happy to leave it alive. So if we look at languages and intercultural education, which is the focus of today, and trying to link this notion of embodiment, we can say that languages, as we all know, are not only learned to satisfy certain standards and forms, but they're also thought and felt as intimate, as part of who we are. And there is an emerging field of research in language, as we know, that is looking at identity, emotions. So it's not just the structure of language and the more formal side of language learning. In my research and teaching, I deal exactly with that, with the internal side of language learning, but also language teaching, and creating safe language environment to express identity through language learning, and looking at itineraries of language learners and teachers. And the focus is also on teachers, not only on learners, because usually there is a lot of attention on the learner side and we forget, on the identity of the teaching. And in valuing and giving voice to the more private side of language learning and the study of language learning, and the connection with human beings and also non-human beings. That's also quite different, probably. And we must ask ourselves when we are learning, among other things, which are the actants that influence the way we learn and we teach our languages. And actants, by actants, and I use this neutral word because I mean not only people, but also objects and the body as well. So language teaching and researching, also not only teaching and learning, is for me an act of care, of encounters with others. For me, that's the main important thing. And it's a deep and transformational learning. So language learning is transformational, as we all know. Learning a new language is putting yourself into a different body, using your voice differently, using your gesture differently. So it's a deep and transformational learning. It's embodied, I think, always. Language are embodied. The voice itself, it's part of the body. And if you think how you use the voice differently in different languages, it's and your face and your expressions and how you move yourself in the space. And teaching for me in general, not only language teaching, is an act of responsibility, but I would like to divide this word into taking response, the ability to respond. And intercultural learning, for me, it's above all this, the ability to respond to the other. And intercultural education, if we move through the topic of today, it's to empower learners also to see the world through the, sorry, there is a spelling mistake, through the eyes of others, and to develop empathy and that capacity also to take responsibility through the language learning, through coming in contact with different cultures and different ways of being in the world. So it's not only about the language. So a little bit about my theoretical background. I don't know if some of you are familiar with posthumanism. It's a philosophical, it's grounded on philosophy. And then from, as all theories, the philosophy, it's applied into research, into teaching, into practice, but it's very deeply grounded in philosophy. And it's challenging the idea of the human. And not to deny the human or deconstruct the human, but it's trying to go beyond the notion of identity as only linked to the self, to the person. So posthumanism is trying to put the emphasis on the relational side of identity, on the fact that identity is multiple, is situated, and it's everything that is surrounding the body has an influence on who we are. Other people, of course, but also the environment and also object. So the post is not thinking about something, you know, for the future, but the post means beyond the body and beyond the self and the unity of the self. Posthumanism, there are a lot of branches of posthumanism. Some are looking, but not only at the relationship between the human and the technology. So maybe you're familiar with that. So there are a lot of studies looking at the relationship with the human and the machines, but that's not my interest. There are some studies looking at the relationship with the human and the environment, and also the human and indigenous culture, or the human and art, for example. And a lot of studies on posthumanism are dealing with children learning and how children learn with the body and less with the mind. So there are different branches, and also there is an emerging branch in language education. So just to give you some idea, as I said, is the centering the human from the center of the discourse. So you might think, okay, why the body then? But the body is not only the human body, and you will see later on. It's a relational inquiry, so looking at relations rather than identity as one. So that's why I think it's very important for intercultural learning and teaching. Focus on the interactions of agents, interaction also with the body and the objects, the body and where you're sitting, for example, right now, the screen that you're using is part of this encounter, and we cannot deny it. Looking at multiple agents in the identity construction, looks at matter as vibrant. So matter, by matter, I mean, you know, what objects are made of, as vibrant, as alive. There is a meaning in objects, and it's not only the meaning that we give to objects, but there is an internal vitality in a way that you will see later on. And also moving, you know, to more concrete things, posthumanism is trying to give voice to minor and marginal stories that sometimes are left behind. So there are a lot of research with posthumanism in not only with language, but also in embodied narratives, in the art, in dance, in performative studies, feminist studies, post-colonial studies, post-structuralism. It's grounded actually within post-structuralism and post-colonialism, and different methodologies, so different ways of doing research. The posthumanism uses a lot of art-based research of objects and making things rather than just theorizing, and is trying to go beyond language. So that's why I think it's important to bring posthumanism with intercultural learning, because it's not only about language intercultural learning, it's also the interaction of bodies and different realities that we experience, not only through language. Within posthumanism, there is also a focus on autoethnography, so the story, the narration of the self. So in a lot of research with posthumanism, there are stories, and then the focus is on small stories and the importance of you know, the little stories, not just the big data, and how the stories are related to each other. And the notion also of writing, it's very important in posthumanism. So writing, from a research point of view, it's not just a final act of writing your thesis, for example, but writing is seen as a process. While you write, you also explore new concepts, new ideas. And this, again, I think is very important for language learning. The writing is not just the exam, it's not just the final product, but writing it's a process of inquiry, it's a process of discovery, and it's a process where we can learn a lot. It's not just the product. And also, yeah, alternative narratives, as I said. I give you another couple of quotes and then we move on. I left on purpose a little bit blurred. I hope you can read, but because the idea of posthumanism is blurring the boundaries. So the posthuman subject is materialist, so it's grounded, it's vitalist, it's embodied, interrelated. Such a subject is polymorphous and relational. So the idea of relationality is at the center of posthumanism and also of intercultural theory, I think. Another quote, which I think is central to what we are discussing, is the idea that to learn, to think for yourself through thinking with others. So that is one key aspect of posthuman thinking. Thinking about yourself is also thinking with others and about others. And these hyphen are very important in posthuman writing, because posthumanism, it's about relationships. So posthuman thinkers use a lot of these hyphen to relate words one to the other, so that the language is not an isolated item. And this, I think, is quite interesting in language teaching and language learning, how you relate words together, how you create sentences, how you can invent also new words and new sentences. So from this idea of posthumanism and so the notion of relationality with the world, with environment, with other people, but not only people, with objects, with the material surrounding us, I invite you maybe for a moment to stop and think where you are situated now, where you are sitting, for example. Think of your body and the chair, think of yourself and the computer, think of the lighting that is in your room, what is outside your room. So all these has an influence on the moment and the relationship we have just now in this moment. So, and if you translate also to your students when you're in the classroom and language learning, I think it's quite important. So maybe just take a second to think of yourself, where you are grounded and what is surrounding you. And then we can think about these, about the materiality of language learner, language teachers, and their lives. And what does it mean, that materiality, the objects and the embodiments of the learning? What can we learn from meaningful objects? Yeah, the language learners or teachers surround with or bring with themselves in their classroom, for example. Or now that we work and teach online, the meaningful of objects and of technology and the connection with that technology and the learning, it's important. It's part of the learning and it's part of language learning. What practices can we engage with this notion of materiality and of objects and vitality of the matter? And how do such practices tell us about how we feel languages? So, in the Padlet, some of you mentioned senses and embodiment, and the language is not only language, it's not only what we say, what we utter. So new materialism, it's another philosophy link and within posthumanism. So posthumanism is overreaching. New materialism is really looking at the importance of artifacts, the importance of objects and the matter. So the vital materialism of embodied objects, stories, body and artifacts. And Jane Bennett is one of the main thinkers in this idea of materiality. And she affirms a figure of matter as an active principle. So matter as active, as a universe of lively materiality that's always in various stages of congealment and diffusion, active, creative, as a flow of continuous becoming. Our body are made of this materiality. And as we know, we are constantly changing, and so do our learners and our languages. So new materialism is this big entanglement of different colors, different shapes, and within these there is also the human body. So that's why posthumanism is trying to move away just from the self as identity, as one, and the self as, you know, multiple and in relationship with the materiality of the world that surrounds us. And this, I think, has an impact also on language teaching and language learning. So as I said, matter is not only human beings, it's alive and shape also social and political ways of understanding how we position objects, for example, how we relate ourselves within the space. Meaning is not only made by participants, by people in social practices, but also by body experiences and what is around the body. So new materialism places the lived reality of the body as central concern when speaking about social and political processes, and the body in relation with other bodies. And by body, I'm not speaking only of the human body. But, and here we go a little bit deeper in the notion of embodied knowledge. So the knowledge through the senses that some of you rightly put into the Padlet. And again, there is a famous philosopher, Sobchak, who is quite famous also in film studies, that she speaks about the carnal knowledge. So the knowledge through our senses, not only through our mind. And this for language learning, I think it's vital. If you think of yourself when you travel to a new country, your experience is so much either total confusion or empowerment or a mix of both by just what you see, the different colors, the different shapes, the smells, what you touch, what you eat, what you hear. So the language is not only that part that you hear, but it's also what you feel, touch, and sense through your body and through other bodies. So the lived body it's an object and a subject at the same time. It's sensual, it's active, and it's in relation with other bodies. So Jane Bennett, as I mentioned, is at the core of this philosophy of new materialism, and it's linked to this notion of word making, so making of teachers and learners as active makers in the world, also through their action, through teaching, but also through their participation in social actions. And in my research, particularly, I argue that this, for me, throws new light to the experience of language learning and teacher by, you know, focusing on objects and sensual experiences with languages and cultures, as also from the theoretical and abstract point of view and the science that we are more familiar with language as, you know, structural and symbolic. But slowly moving away from this notion of language as, you know, just structure and forms, and moving towards a notion of language as intimate objects, as like clothes, books, photos, pictures, who tells a story of who we are and also who other people are, and through which we can engage with interculturality and language learning. So through the objects, we can cherish that we also make sense of our own cultures, of our languages, and the multilingual makeup that we are made of and the world is made of. This is an important book. As I said, you know, posthumanism is slowly coming into linguistic, and this book by Alistair Pennycock is exactly that, is posthumanist applied linguistics. So it's really applying this theory to the field of language, applied linguistic, language teaching and learning. So if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to buy the book and to read it. And it's not a big book, but it's quite dense, and it's very illuminating and informative if you're interested in these concepts. And my research project is closely linked to this book, and is looking at the notion of invisible stories, language teachers' invisible stories. And as I'll show you later on, I make use of a lot of objects to tell the stories. And I think the same could be applicable in language classroom and in dealing with intercultural communication and intercultural awareness and learning. So if you think of objects, and in this picture you have millions of little of big objects, and the value that objects have in our life, think of, I don't know, just think of any objects that are surrounding you now and how they influence who you are, your identity, your connection with people around you. So we usually think of objects as passive, or maybe we just give an aesthetic value or a formal value, because some objects like the phone, for example, are tools to communicate. But if we just move from that vision of objects as tools or only as an aesthetic value or practical value, but like the object as part of who we are, as companions and agents, and as the emotional part that they play in our lives. So I think that shifts a little bit also your concept of interculturality, language teaching and language learning. So I'll stop here now for a little activity, which I hope you will do with me. So because we are speaking of materiality and objects, I ask you, and I'll give you 5 minutes, I ask you to choose an object. If you want just something that is next to you now, or if you want to get up and choose a meaningful object, something that has meaning to you, emotional meaning, or just any object that is around you at present. So just take a moment or two to focus on an object or to get up and get an object. If it's something meaningful, of course, it's the activity is more impactful, but could be also any object. So I'm waiting that you have an object next to you. And I call these my dear objects. So again, we are giving some emotional quality to the object. Yeah, it's not just a phone, for example, yeah, but it's something important in your life. And I give really 5 minutes or a little bit more if needed. And I ask you to, think of this object or take this object with you. If you have next to you, it's more powerful. And write down some thoughts about this object. So first, just some little sentences. I don't know, it's, for example, this scarf, it's a real scarf. It's one of my scarves. And I don't know, I could just write down quickly, it's red, it's long, it's made of wool, or just some adjectives if you want. And then from that, I'm asking you something a little bit strange, maybe to have a conversation with this object. So again, to think of the object as alive, as vital, as part of who you are. And maybe you can write a little dialogue with the object, or an email or a letter. Just try to use your creativity. And I'll give you an example of my writing with a scarf, and then I'll leave you time to do yours. So I wrote, dear scarf, I'm so happy I found you again while I was putting some order in my wardrobe. I thought I had lost you. You keep me warm. I travel with you to some distant places. You came with me everywhere. You're part of me. I'm so glad we found each other again. You have been given to me by a very special person who meant a lot to me. We are now reconnected. And this is real, yeah, this scarf, it's real, it's important to me. So I give you 5 minutes to write something, and it's important that you have the dialogue with the object. Yeah, it's not just in a third person, but imagine the object is alive and next to you. So yeah, 5 minutes from now, and you can do some writing. You have another 2 minutes. One minute. Okay. So I would like to invite you, if anybody feels brave, maybe to read what you wrote. I think we are in a safe place and space and environment to do. We trust each other, we are connected, some of us know each other. So if anybody feels or would like to share their writing, we have I put aside a few minutes to do that. So I really would welcome if anybody would like to read. Yes, I think someone has the hand up. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm happy to read mine. I wrote a dialogue, and there's nothing too revealing or anything. So I'm happy to read mine if you want.
Thank you.
So my object is my bottle of water, which is a shop bought water bottle that is made of glass, and some words to describe it are glass, transparent, and useful. And so here it goes. Hi, bottle. That's me. And the bottle replies, hi, Anna. And I go, how are you? Are you having a nice day? Yeah, sure, says the bottle. It's nearly time to fill you up again. Okay, I'll do it as soon as this talk finishes. I'm getting really thirsty. Sure. I'm so glad I found you and that you're made of glass. You've really helped me reduce my use of plastic and have become my everyday companion. Oh, that's great. No problem. I think they're calling me back into the meeting. That's okay. I'll be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's very powerful. As you can see from my little talk earlier on, the personal stories are political. The personal is always political. Just by your little story of the bottle made of glass and you reducing the use of plastic, just in this little dialogue. So the object has a space in your life. The relationship with the object, it's important, and in that there are many more relationships. It's not just the object, obviously. Good, thank you. Anybody else who would like to share? I cannot see all the hands, just pick up, or Thomas, you can help me if you. Yeah, Alexandra, I can see your hand up. It's up.
Okay, I just need to see if I can see my my text. Okay, so can you see it? This is what I chose.
Yes, sure.
And I wrote an email to my mountain boots. Hi, mountain boots. It feels bizarre writing to you in English. I would normally talk with you in our first language. We had so many adventures together, visited different countries, places, mountains. As always, my father did buy you, as the many mountain shoes before you and after you, but I still kept you to bring you with me. I wish us together many more hiking tours around the world. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It's really powerful. And again, in this little story, there is so much. Yeah, there are so many relationships within that connection with the shoe and your past and where you're coming from and your languages. Thank you.
And I can well imagine doing it with my students.
Yes, yeah, you can do it. That was my next step, exactly. Now, if you imagine doing this in the foreign language, that's, it's a very interesting activity. Yes, I can see another hand up, but I don't see the name, so please.
Daniela.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So I have this one, that's a Qigong ball. I think it's usually 2. So I have the other one with me as well. But so these anti-stress balls that you move in your hands. So I just wrote a brief letter in the same style as you did to your scarf. Dear Qigong ball, we are together for 20 years now. When you came into my life, I would have never thought that we would stay together for so long. You calm me down whenever needed. There was a time when I left you behind, but I came back to you, and now you're there to stay with me. That's basically it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think, Sandrine, you put in the chat, I just look quickly, that you would like to read yours.
Okay. So my object, I'm not sure if I've got my camera on, but it's my diary. And I've written a little something. So I would be lost without you. What's happening next? Quick check. You've always been given to me for Christmas by my mum, putting my life in order. I keep you on a yearly basis as a memento of special moments, kids events, family days, evenings out, runs, you know it all.
Wonderful, thank you. So there is so much interrelationality in that diary and in your writing. Thank you. I can see another hand. It's Chiara, I think.
Yes, but it was a late hand. Is there time?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so my object is a fountain pen. And so I wrote with the pen. Dear pen, you are with me every morning. You help me disentangle my thoughts on my journal, clear up the air, allow me to slow down, open up, and take in the lights at dawn. It's you who marks the pages of the letters I write to my beloved daughter now that she's away at university. It's you who signs birthday cards, get better cards, sympathy cards. Whereas I write in English or Italian, you follow or maybe guide my hand and the shape of my writing, neat, agitated, confused, delighted. You weren't always my best pen, but you are now, and I thank you. Grazie.
Grazie, Chiara. That's really wonderful, very powerful, and a lot in this pen and in your writing. Maria?
Yes, I chose a ukulele that I bought during lockdown. And I wrote to the ukulele and I said, hello, my dear ukulele. I'm sorry I have abandoned you in the loft. I think of you sometimes, but there's always something happening that takes away from visiting you again. We had lots of fun during lockdown. I guess I should reconnect again. And I'm quite emotional because it's related to lockdown, which was a very difficult time.
Yeah, so all this is quite emotional. We are doing quickly and so on, but my next question is how did you feel doing this activity? It was difficult, easy. Of course, you choose where to go. Yeah, and that's also, I think, the important the value of this kind of activity, if you're thinking of doing with your students or in a foreign language. You can set more clear boundaries if you want. I did quite open with you because we are professional, we are grown up, and yeah, I trusted you. But if you want in class, you can put closer boundaries, you can restrict a little bit to if you are worried about emotion coming out, or you can be more directive also with the language if you focus on the language learning. But I think activities like these are also good to be left open and then see what comes. So I don't know if any of you would like to share, how did you feel doing it? Do you feel silly, stupid? Do you think this is intercultural work? Or I don't know if anybody would like to share. We have another couple of minutes. So how did you feel doing the activity? Anybody that would like just to share a thought or two, and then we move on? Or put in the chat, of course. Yeah, it's emotional, it's fun, and it's but you can see what the theory that I was describing to you in practice immediately, you know, the vitality of matter, of objects, the relationship, the interculturality that there is in an object. And if we think of focusing and moving that into the language classroom, or asking also students to bring objects, yeah, in the classroom, not just to imagine and think, or at home as homework. So it's just moving the teaching and learning towards the materiality and seeing language as embodied and linked to the objects.
Yeah, I do this. I don't know if you can see me. I turn on the camera.
Yeah.
Hi, Renat. I do this kind of exercise with a kind of team module that we do with Purdue University. It's very, very similar. It's not called My Dear Object, but it's actually, we ask students to record a short video, and we share all the video on Flipgrid. And students have to talk about an object that they have taken from home to university, and they did not abandon at home because it's very, very meaningful to them. And they have to talk about this object. And it's really, really interesting, the kind of range of things that students take with them. Yes. To kind of, they have something to do about their history, their relation, their attachment to people, to memories, sometimes something that they have left behind, or people who lived. And because it's a kind of transnational, with students who are in America with very, very different background from our student, is interesting because some of the objects are actually unknown. You look at the object and we don't know actually what they are.
And that is the intercultural element. So you also, you know, now we did quickly, but you can also embed technology, you can do video, you can do storytelling, you can do part of a portfolio, for example. So there are many, many ways that you can make this activity an intercultural activity that then brings the intimacy and the private world and really the meaningful learning. Then curiosity starts to emerge. For example, I was very curious immediately, you know, about your stories and the objects that you brought. And if you think of that in a classroom, it's really bringing the culture alive, I think. And you can use you know, different strategies to do that, and different times also, and length, and so on. So to move on, and then, you know, happy to have the conversation also later on, but I'm just looking at the time. So what we did was also an activity that is using creative writing. And also, as I mentioned, I'm also a psychotherapist. So these kind of things are also used in therapy because there is a lot of theory in psychoanalysis attached to objects and how objects are called transitional. Transitional objects means that into them we transit, so we project our emotions, our relationships. So there is a lot of meaning in activity like that, or even if, you know, we can also do in a trivial or superficial way, but you know, we attach a lot of ourselves to objects, believe it or not. And so they are meaningful, and then learning becomes very meaningful. You know, you reach a different stage of learning when you touch deep, meaningful feelings and belonging. So I had included a break, but we don't do the break because I think this was the break. We had a fun activity, and also Thomas told me that it's better, for the time frame, you don't have a break, but feel free to go and grab a coffee or eat, of course, because it's lunchtime, and we carry on without a break. So I'll tell you a little bit about my research, and then also I'll show you another application of this theory into teaching. So to ground again the theory, to make it a little bit more concrete. So my research as part of my doctorate that I'm about to complete, I'm a mature student, so I started my doctorate later in life and for personal reasons. I call as the title of my doctorate is Language Teachers' Invisible Stories, and I call them invisible because that's part of my research. And as you know, language teaching a lot of time is invisible within institutions, within the politics of institutional, within academic discourse, within social discourses, just thinking of the contract that we have usually are given, which are not academics and so on in most institutions. Maybe now things are slowly changing. So there is a bit of invisibility in the language teaching profession, at least in UK, at least in higher institutions, and not only. And I was interested in this notion of the intersection between personal, professional, and also political and social. So I work with colleagues in my same department, with 10 of them, and looking at their stories of becoming a language educator, so a language teacher. So, and my research was grounded on posthumanism. Posthumanism is also deconstructing the notion of traditional research. So I didn't have a design or a clear framework. I just jumped into my research, and then the framework developed with me. But what I had in my mind is this relationship between personal and professional, and I just had one research question, which was, what does it mean to you being and becoming a language educator? And that was the main research question. And then we played during the research with objects. So I asked the participant to bring an object to the research. And then the interviews, which are not called interviews but conversation, were really conversations without a set framework or a set of established questions, but were conversation among two colleagues about the object they brought, like a little bit we have now, and what was the meaning of this object, why they decided to bring. And I asked to bring objects that would symbolize language teaching, or a photo of themselves, or whatever they wanted. And also there is also myself as part of the research. I am also one of the stories of the research. And then around this object, around the conversation, I constructed some narratives that then I share also with the participant. And around these narratives were some poems were co-constructed. And then we did also a final workshop together, an art workshop with an artist who, through the artist, we put into practice some of these, and we created some canvas bags with the images that each of the participants wanted to put as a meaning of language teaching and also of participating in the research. So, but without going too much in detail, it's just an example of the power of objects in research, and linking objects to personal narratives, and then linking the personal narratives to the professional and to also the political and social. So these are some of the objects that colleagues brought to the research, just photos, objects. Now we don't go into details, but I just want to give you a feeling of the materiality of what was brought to the research. These were the mapping that we discuss around the objects, we design, we create. It was the idea of the trajectory. My question was, how did you decide to become, and when did you decide to become a language educator, and why? And as you can see, there is all zigzagging movement. It's never a linear pathway, and there are a lot of colors and things. Then this mapping were put into a digital form and so on. And then was a final workshop that we did together. And as you can see, there is the materiality of doing together, being together, the relationality, and so on. So this is just an example of research, of these ideas brought into the research. And but today is not so much about my research, so I move on. But it's just to give you an idea of the vitality and the porosity of materiality and the meaning that could be created through doing things together. And if you can think these of your classroom, for example, you can bring, and I'm sure you do already, all these into your classroom. And this is one of the poems that was co-created with one of the participants that I would like to read to you. And it's about language teaching. I am a chameleon. I move in between countries. I move in between languages. I'm looking for my identity. Who am I? I dance. I dance with words. I dance with my children. I play with them the games of languaging, the games of being a mother. What is a mother? I change my skin many times, not being me, being me. So this was one of the final results and answering the question, what does it mean to you being a language teacher? As you can see, the intersection between personal, professional, political, many languages, it's at the core of these. And this is also what our language learner brings on. It's not only about language teaching and my research. Another little example about my teaching this time, I've been teaching now for 2 years a module in collaboration with a colleague from a different department, without going too much in details, but the assessment of this module is linked to everything that we are discussing today, doing with objects, personal stories, narratives. So the students of this module had to work on a portfolio in which every week they have to write something about themselves. So not something about what they've learned, but something about themselves in the module. So it's like a reflective diary. So they have to do, that was not graded, there was no mark, but they had to do it. So every week they had to put an entry on their digital diary. What was marked, the assessment, at the end of the module, they have to write a reflective report about the module, so embedding their learning with the content. This module was about the COVID experience of old people and was delivered in a department of psychiatry, so nothing to do with language learning, but I was teaching interculturality within that module and how to engage with old people. And I was teaching also this part in relation to assessment and the e-portfolio and the art-based research, really, which become art-based assessment. So to summarize, they had to write every week an entry in a portfolio about themselves in the module. Then the assessment was the report that they had to write in the form of an essay about their experience of the module and a digital project. So they had to transform all the learning that they have done in the module in a digital form of their choice. And here you have some images. Some did a podcast, some did a video, some did just a PowerPoint, some did some digital painting and other forms. And on the next page, there are some other examples. And the theme of the module was, as I said, COVID with old people and so on. But what I just wanted to give you, it's an example of this little activity that we did, how it can be transformed within classes and how these, for me, it's interculturality, it's the connection of object, yourself, your stories, the others, and language learning, if the focus is language learning. In this case was not. And I forgot to say also that everybody could have access to the diary. So everybody could also read the diary. And we said that from the beginning. So students knew if they wanted to put something to personal or not, they could choose. But the idea was exactly the interculturality, the co-sharing, the collaborative act of learning together. And so they decided what to put, but a lot of them started, very shy, and then they were sharing also deep and important feelings. And you don't need to be an artist to do something like that, because we gave total freedom of choosing, the art form they want in the digital art form. Some, as you can see, were, very artistic. Some were just using a simple PowerPoint, but we didn't, we didn't mark the artistic value. We marked the meaning that was represented. So, because of course it's not a course of art. But it's just an idea of what we are discussing, which is in new materialism, objects are called the thing power. So the idea that things, objects have power. And particularly if you think of language classroom, and like Sonia shared early on, if you don't know objects and objects are described with you, you enter into the interculturality of the objects, therefore of the culture, and of the power that it's carried within objects and within the body as well. So agency is not only in the human being, but also in things, and the think power in the body, and in the relationships. In clothes, for example, that we are used a lot in language learning and language teaching. If you think, one of the first classes and beginners is usually, about clothes or the body. So if you try to change that in something that could be more meaningful, concrete for the student, not just as describing, but doing things with things. So objects say much more about the language we speak, the language we inhabit, and our cultural makeup. All these philosophical discussion about new materialism and posthumanism, it's grounded on this notion that we are situated, and that's why I started my talk with situating myself, because each of us is situated in a space, place. Even if we move around, even if we have migrated, we all have our internal point of reference, but also, which could be many, not just one. But it's important, this notion of situatedness, also when you teach intercultural studies or when you work with languages, because it's that relationality between different places that it's at the center of the encounter and different languages, and it's at the center of intercultural learning. So this idea of situation, but also situated, but also of movement. You can go out from your situated area, situated knowledge, situated belonging, and you can also come back in, and you can move in and out. So our knowing of the world is always partial and situated, and this is central to intercultural learning. If you think of the theories of intercultural learning, the notion of partiality, the notion of having lenses through which you see the world. You see the world and experience the world through yourself. So it's always partial, it's always situated, and we cannot get away from that notion. So giving more emphasis to that and to the materiality of that situationality, I think it's important. So our perception of who we are is always mediated by the context in which we live in, and the language, of course. Our perception of the world is constructed by our surroundings, by the objects, and the human and non-human material world that we are in contact with. So this idea of the post-human is giving agency also to what is around us, not only we at the center of the universe. And our languages shape, of course, who we are, but also our bodies, and our languages are embodied. And we are in a constant process of becoming. So we are situated, but we're also constantly changing and moving and becoming different through situated. And this notion of situated knowledge comes from a philosopher who is called Donna Haraway, and she's very famous and important in feminist studies and also in post-human studies. Very important in intercultural study, as you know, is the notion of belonging. And here I put a book by Bell Hooks that maybe you read, maybe you know Bell Hooks. It's quite a famous philosopher, thinker, and also connected with posthumanism. And this idea of belonging, and what does it mean to call a place home? And does it matter having a home to feel belonging? Do people who are homeless belong? Do we create a community with or without a home? How do we belong? And there are multiple ways of belonging and not belonging. Even if we have, a settled place, maybe we feel we don't belong in the community. And also the idea of belonging as a verb that implies movement. It's not something static. And if you, think of that in our language classes and how we teach languages, the notion that language is not static, it's always changing, moving. And belonging is also in the bodies, in the senses. So it's fluid, it's multiple, it's not just one notion. That's why I always struggle with intercultural framework when they try to put into a framework this notion of movement and of belonging and of becoming through languages. And nowadays, of course, but ever, we always lived in the notion of nomadism, of movement, and nowadays more than ever. So moving across culture, moving across territories, but also moving internally through different languages and territories. There is an Italian philosopher, Rosi Braidotti, who is a post-human philosopher, who speaks about the nomadic identity and the notion of nomadism, not only as a movement across territories, but also as an internal state of mind. For example, moving across disciplines, it's a nomadic identity. Moving across languages, it's a nomadic identity. And we all, I think, inhabit this notion of nomadism. And if you apply this notion of nomadism to intercultural teaching and learning, becomes embodied. So we live in a permanent process of transition, hybridization, nomadization, particularly also with the digital world, but not only. We live in a constant flux of becoming other through others and through the encounter with others. At these in-between stages and stages define the established modes of representation, if you think of teaching, and this zigzagging, non-linearity, if you think of the research process that I showed you earlier on, there were all these zigzagging to the question, where do you belong, where do you come from? Nothing is linear, nothing is order, it's all moving around. So again, you might want to do this activity or just think about it. Looking at the time, sorry, maybe you can think for a few seconds about mundane objects, maybe meaningless object or meaningful object that define who you are. So we did an activity about one object, but if you think of maybe we don't have time to share, but I give you a couple of minutes just to think about objects that are meaningful in your life and who defines. So think of 5 to 10 objects who define who you are really deeply, not just about the phone next to you, which might be, by the way, a meaningful object. So yeah, just think about 5 to 10 really objects that defines who you are and where you are situated and where you belong. You can write or draw the objects, for example, or you can just think about them because we don't have a lot of time. But again, think of these also in relation to your students, and then you can ask your students, we don't do this now because of time, to write a mini autobiography in relation to this object. So if you think of language learning, there is a lot there because suddenly it's not just where are you from, where do you live, how many brothers or sisters you have, by starting from the object, from the self, then writing about what is really meaningful to you and your situated place and space and your relationality to the objects, and through the objects to other people and to the land and to where you belong, and it's the interculturality. So, I can give you maybe a couple of seconds to think about these and what does this mean to you or to your classes. And we can have a little discussion about these, maybe a couple of minutes if anybody would like to say something, or and then we carry on. Anybody who would like to say something or
Ruth has her hand up.
Yeah. I mean, I can see why you say 5 objects, because if you said as many as are important to you, then this could take all day long. But if I wanted to describe myself in 5 objects, I would feel quite objectified rather than understood better. So I wonder how I would avoid my students feeling like that.
Yeah. Yes, it's a good point, but we're going beyond the object. Yeah, it's the object, the starting point, and then you writing about yourself through the objects, and then you forget in a way also about the objects while you're writing.
Yes, but you really have to trust each other for that.
Yes.
I mean, if say you say lentils, and that's a student with a Pakistani background, and then everybody laughs. How is this going to work?
Why do you think everybody's laughing if someone would say
Well,
that?
I don't know whether they will be laughing, but I have to think of reactions that are not what I would expect.
Yes.
Do you understand? I can't just prepare a lesson thinking I would react like that and then that's what's going to happen.
Yes, of course, activities like these you do when you are established your classes, your relationships, and you decide if you do or not. I did many times. They are very meaningful. Students are deeply engaged and they also learn a lot about other cultures. And some, I think only once, and I did many times, happens that a student didn't want to do, and that's perfectly okay. But also for me, teaching, and that is something I deeply believe, it's risk taking. So we need to take risk in teaching. We cannot just protect our students. So we create a safe environment. That's important, that's essential. But in that safe environment, particularly if we teach languages, particularly if we teach interculturality, we have to allow for risk and for the unknown to expect, because that's life, that's culture, it's interculturality. So yes, if you do activities like that, a lot can come out, a lot of unexpected, and usually that's create knowledge and that creates intercultural relationship. Chiara, sorry, you have your hand up, and I think someone else, but I don't see the name. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was thinking of the word vulnerability while you said risk-taking, but also because I am reading something by sort of Bell Hook. It was nice and easy here, talking about sort of engaged pedagogy. And I'm thinking that for this isn't training. This is a sharing of a way of teaching that needs to be part of who you are or who you are becoming and who you want to be. And therefore, I think that it requires some practice with ourselves and feeling that this is something, unlike I'm taking a course on Blackboard or knowledge precisely because it's so part of us. Yes, this level of techniques, I feel that they can only explode whilst we do them to ourselves first. And I see some similarity with something that has occupied my mind at a lower level, at MA level, which is called contemplative pedagogy, that has a lot of sort of similarity in terms of philosophy sort of there behind it. Yes. But the idea is that you can really sort of practice in class when you feel that you're comfortable with it, or that you're comfortable enough to take that risk.
Absolutely. And you go stages. Yeah, here I'm
stages.
Giving ideas and a link to this philosophy that you might decide are not for you at all. But my teaching and my philosophy of teaching languages, but not only, is to take risk, and is to language learning to be deep, meaningful, impactful, not just superficial and based only on the usual structures and sentences. For me, if a language learner is able to do this activity, it learns a lot first, because a lot of vocabulary, a lot of structures, and also the activity becomes meaningful, I think. Maria, you have your hand up, and I think someone else had, but I missed the hand up, sorry.
No, I mean, I just think also it's about establishing clear rules in your classroom and have the students understand what is the meaning of the exercise. I mean, I used to do activities like this when I used to teach in the US, when I was teaching high school. And I have to say they were the most, the students responded so well to activities like this. The interesting thing is also the student doesn't have to be 100% honest if they feel uncomfortable sharing. So you are giving them the opportunity to share at whatever level they want to share, and you're not questioning how deep they are with in this case, the objects that they choose, as long as they're able to create a story behind it. At least that's my opinion.
Absolutely. There is a beautiful book, which I can put in the reference, I didn't put, but by another philosopher of education, which is called Gerard Biesta, and the book is called The Beautiful Risk of Education. So it's really speaking about taking risk in your classes and making your classes a safe space, safe that students can feel free to take risks. And language learning, it's risk-taking. If you think how difficult it is to put yourself into another language, into another semantic, semiotic system, it's risk-taking, you know? And if we can make that playful and so on, but we can make also that deep and meaningful. And again, there are a lot of theories in education about transformative and deep learning, which is that kind of learning that is linked to the identity. And a lot of these theories says that, you know, learning to be deep and meaningful has to be linked to what is called identity work, linked to the personal. But again, might not be for everybody. So, you know, these are just some ideas of my conception of interculturality beyond the usual frameworks. And yeah, for you to thought and think and discuss. And, you know, another example is thinking of clothes, for example, which we all use in our language classroom. No? We just have the lesson 3 or 4 of beginners, describe your clothes yourself. But again, if you give a little twist to that and use clothes as a metaphor, as a skin, as part of who you are, maybe asking students to bring clothes in the classroom, or again, to describe their life or their identity through their clothes. Of course, you enter in difficult matters here because clothes are political. Clothes are, we use clothes in different ways. Think of the scarf that I described earlier on, which for me it's a scarf, you know, a scarf in another culture, it's a religious symbol. And so, of course, if we do activity like this, we enter into dangerous territory, but interculturality, it's dangerous territory for me. And language learning is protected, but you know, we should touch these, when we speak about intercultural, we speak about races, we speak about, you know, culture, gender, social class. So it's not only language learning when we touch these. So yeah, clothes, you know, as a metaphor to describe the intercultural experience is very powerful. And particularly with young people, it's very funny to use clothes as a metaphor in language learning and in intercultural learning. So, you know, clothes are embodied identities, really, you know, the way we dress, the way we use our clothes to hide, to mask, or to bring out something that we want other people to really experience and see and perceive. So clothes are not only, passive objects, but, you know, they are a representation of our culture first and also our identity. Clothes are our skin, and there is a lot written about these, and they tell a lot also about the place. I think Alexandra bought, you know, in the activity a mountain shoe. So, for example, you know, that tells it's already a big intercultural element, the mountain shoe in this connection that we have. So, yeah, objects are part of who we are. Yeah, we are through our objects, and we are not objectified. That's different, you know, but our objects are part of ourselves. If you think of the vitality of matter that I described at the beginning, and of this philosophy that speaks of object as companions, not just objects. And objects have memories, and the memories that we attach to these objects. Now, if in the activity of choosing 5 to 10 objects, who defines yourself, there are memories, there are people attached to these objects. And this, for me, it's interculturality. It's not just the framework of, that we usually are exposed to. So objects and clothes tell a narrative of ourselves, our past, our languages. You know, we can speak about cultural memories, which is, you know, quite important through the object, through body memories. A lot of migration studies, for example, are based on the value of objects. And the learner's complex identities are understood and maybe better understood through objects, and can also be used in a funny way, not just, you know, in a deep emotional way. Yeah, we can ask students to, you know, to do an exhibition about their objects. So a curated exhibition like they did, my students in this portfolio that I show you, were all about themselves and their objects and their relationship to learning. So we have to make that connection, of course. and we have to guide them. That's what maybe was alive in the discussion, you know, earlier on. We need to scaffold, we need to guide, like any other kind of learning. It's not just throw in there. Of course, the activity I did today with you, you know, were just quick because, you know, we are adults and professionals, but, you know, all these needs a lot of preparation, scaffolding, like any other kind of learning and teaching. So what I want to say, for me, interculturality, it's about lived identities, embodied identities, and clothes are part of that, you know, and placed in time and space. If you will connect to Bayram, you know, just to mention one of the names about intercultural studies, you know, the languages are lived into. Bayram is not using posthumanism or new materialism, but, you know, I made this connection also to link these theories. And Bayram speaks about lived and embodied languages, about the embodiment that its place in language learning. So language learning for me is intercultural and embodied experience, and it's not only, you know, the acquisition of knowledge, of structure, but it's live, felt, embodied, as some of the linguists that you might be familiar with, like Pavlenko, Kramsh, Norton, who speaks about emotions and language and identity, and they speak about the embodied language and language learning as embodied. The learner's identities are complex. We sometimes want to reduce this complexity in the classroom, and we want to reduce the language learner as a simple object, but actually, you know, there is a biography behind every language learner. So why not bringing that biography to the forefront and making part of the learning? So, you know, I wanted to use the breakout rooms, but maybe we can have just the discussion in these last 10 minutes, I think we have. Let me check. Yes, it's 7 minutes, actually. So, yeah, we already started the discussion, but, you know, what do you think, you know, of this idea of learning, experiencing through language, through embodiment? Maybe you do already these activities. Maybe this is just giving a little twist to something that you're already doing. I call these object-based pedagogies. Someone else called art-based pedagogies. Someone else calls embodied pedagogies, and linking these to interculturality. So maybe we can open the floor without the breakout rooms. Thomas, if it's okay with you, we just, you know, have a conversation. I think it's easier like this. If everybody is happy to carry on. We have, 10 minutes. I can see a hand up. Yes, Anna, I think.
Hi, this isn't exactly a question, is sort of me thinking out loud, I suppose. But I suppose if we are recognizing that languages are, you know, lived in experience, and part of the process of learning the language is this embodied interculturality, then what we're saying is that we can enhance it by bringing that element to the fore. So if we do, you know, particular things, and we're always in a classroom and, you know, and doing lectures or have slides, you know, that becomes the experience, and that perhaps if we enhance it with a range of other activities and bringing more personal stories, that might enhance that element and make it more successful. I suppose I'm thinking about my own practice and how I have reflected on the affective element in language learning and teaching. And so, you know, like sometimes having a different dimension when students can interact with other speakers, sometimes outside of the class, or do cultural activities, or and I suppose I'm trying, or, you know, doing anything that is learning through doing. So, you know, kind of clear element maybe, or that is outside of the classroom with other people other than the teacher. I guess I'm also aiming for that experience that enhances the embodiment of in language learning.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. Yes, I think all of us are already doing this in a way or the other. No, maybe it's just enhancing, or maybe giving a bit more prominence or more focus. And, you know, because I show you some assessment, maybe you know, and nobody's mentioning this, but maybe, you know, this would be nice also to see a shift in assessment, you know, or in bringing more of these into the assessment which, you know, some of you might already do it with your portfolios and so on, but maybe allowing more space also in the framework for this kind of learning and teaching to happen. You know, that is not just structural and formal, and that the tests are not just about the language part, which of course it's important. I'm not saying not, but anybody else who would like to express their opinion?
Yeah, I have found that this type of work is actually easier to do with intermediate level students than with advanced students. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me, I mean, it's of course a little bit dependent on the kind of group you have at, you know, in any one year, but the advanced level students are afraid that they might make mistakes, and more mistakes when they have to be more creative, whereas the intermediate students seem to be keener on engaging in the kind of a story they can construct, and they want the others to know the story, and they know anyway, as one of my colleagues observed, they're going to make mistakes, so what, you know, so what? I would like the advanced students to take more advantage of that kind of more open working.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a nice, nice idea of the intermediate as being in between and maybe more, you know, open to experiment or not. But I think, you know, yeah, depends from everybody's experience. You can do with all levels this kind of activity. You target at different, you know, levels. But the intermediate is always an interesting stage. I agree with the language learning, and also they feel that they can expose themselves more. They feel they can do more mistakes. They feel they can play a little bit with the language. While advanced students, sometimes they have this super ego vision of themselves as they need to be perfect. Therefore, they don't maybe take so much risk. And the beginner, this vision that they cannot do it. So that's interesting, the intermediate position. Rosa, I think you have your hand up. I don't know if you have your hands.
Hi, it's just a question that, you know, one thing I have sometimes when I don't do this type of activities, but when you get into the student, I feel that, you know, like sometimes we're asking the students to bring a lot of themselves, but we as teachers, we don't. And I find that a bit difficult to, you know, to just, I feel like we are behind this, or I am behind the scenes, expecting the students to really open up and be more, and, you know, the role of the teacher in there. I think I like you, maybe if you could.
Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful comment. In fact, I do bring myself. In fact, like I did at the beginning of this presentation, that's why I started the presentation quickly with pictures of myself as a child, with pictures of my mother, my father. I do bring myself into the class. I do speak, and then I decided how much I want. But you know, yes, you're right. If you want to do this kind of activities, you have to create an environment that also you know, have to do a bit of that if you feel like, or maybe it's not for you. But you're right. Otherwise, there are always power imbalances, which there are anyway. And also in my research, as I showed to you, I was part of one of the stories, and one of the stories, it's me in the thesis. So yes, you are totally right. And also in art-based research, it's very clearly stated that the researcher becomes one of the participants, for example. So they're trying to diminish this dichotomy between researcher and research, and teacher and student. So very good point. Thank you so much.
Okay, no, thanks.
Chiara?
We can have maybe another one or two, but it's time. I don't know, Thomas, I'll leave it to you.
Well, Chiara is next, but I can just say we have the room half an hour. So if anybody wants to stay a bit longer and finish the discussion.
Okay, we can smoothly finish, and
yeah.
Thank you. Chiara?
No, my comment, and is brief because we're now obviously sort of recording, but I am increasingly participating to seminars and having online and having conversations to what extent we want to we want to record because there is that element of not taking risk and not of the kind of voyeurism. I've done it happily, and I even decided, it took me a while to share the story because I hadn't even had time to reread it, because I really wrote it, and I realized that it was important, and my colleagues carried me through. But I am, again, something that we might, sort of want to consider as we do more of this type of work, sort of for everyone, that is different from a level of training where we all sort of maintain sort of different boundaries.
Yes,
So.
thank you so much, Chiara. Yes, I agree. Particularly if you do this with students, I took for granted that we are in a safe space, as I mentioned, and you decided to speak or not. But if we carry on also teaching online, as we probably do, this notion of recording, it's important, and we should always, ask for consent to the participants, or stop the recording, or absolutely, yes. And
there's one, Rosa.
Yeah. I think Rosa just spoke. Maybe still the previous hand. I don't know.
Me neither.
Okay.
Can I say something? Because Chiara's point made me think of another point. You talked about objects. What about machines?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, often we see machines like objects, but particularly in language teaching, we know also about machines that affect very dramatically the way we teach and the way we use languages and the way we communicate. If you think about machine translations, for example. So would you position machines the same way as objects? And I'm sure Rosa Bradotte and others have lots to say, and I don't know so much about this, but I would be interested to hear about this.
Absolutely, yes. Machines are objects, objects are machine, and there is, as I said at the beginning, a big area of posthuman study that just is about the relationship with the machine, and the machine as an extension of the body. And also there are a lot of study, for example, on the machine using the medicine for aesthetic reason, how the machine change the body and they become part of the body. And so the relationship with the machine is considered as an object. The difference is that object is also acting on the body. No? And yes, and there are a lot of studies also in the digital technology and digital education, and that relationship with the learning, the teaching, and the machine, which is part of the encounter with the learning. And so that's, I think, could be the topic for another workshop, because it's really, really big. And if you think of us now, for example, we see each other through the screen. The workshop could happen only because of the technology, so it's part of who we are in this moment. But we can also see each other's room in the background if we chose to. So yeah, the objects, of course, are so present in our learning environment. So it's impossible not to consider them for me. So I just put the final slides. The idea of language and identity as fluid, multiple. That's at the center of all these. And as I said at the beginning, I didn't present you any framework, because for me, intercultural learning is not about frameworks. You see a lot of interculturality with framework. For me, it's about fluidity. It's about, I just gave some example of objects, but it's not, this is not prescriptive. It's not a framework. It's about you making whatever you want of these, but just, thinking, maybe being curious about these or not. And so, yeah, just, the voice and the agency of objects or machines or encounters, the transformative power that these might have in language classes, the senses, and interculturality through the body. I remind you, the Padlet is still there if you want to write any ideas there. I didn't put my email here, but my email, I think can be circulated if you want to work with me, do something with me about this. I'm very happy to carry on the conversation. And I stop here, but I'm staying here if you want to carry on.
Thank you, Donata. Yes, I can also say I'll send a feedback questionnaire to everyone who attended, but I can include Donata's email as well. And then if you are interested, you can contact her easily. Yeah. So thanks again. So if anybody needs to leave, wants to leave, or wants to hang around, feel free to do so and ask a question or not. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks Donata for a fantastic workshop.
And thank you everybody for sharing stories, for sharing ideas, for bringing your vulnerability to the encounter. So thank you so much.
I'll stay around because I want to ask you something else.
Can I say something?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much for this workshop presentation. I really enjoyed. I didn't know this kind of concept you shared with us today until I heard your explanation about this post, you know, and the new materialism such and forth. I was trying to, you know, the deep learning is one of the key concepts about the language learning and how to encourage my students to engage with the, I'm a Japanese tutor, so I'm trying to let them, you know, have more engagement interest in the language I teach. And I come across with the idea about personalization and the how do you say, can't words. In the personalization I was really looking at is one of the practice. And when you talk about personalized approach, it's automatically going to the students' personal items.
Yeah.
And so I saw some kind of things in common what you were sharing, because I was also, you know, encouraged to have a very safe environment for the students to actually able to voice out what they have, especially, you know, the foreign language. Always they tend to frighten to have mistakes. They've got the huge idea, but they are so frustrated they can't express themselves. So either using the objects or the diagrams or the pictures to speak what they want to share is one of the approach I also use. And, you know, the personal item that kind of share also brings what they want to share attached to the actual items that through the textbook we can really learn. So the personalized approach that I try to kind of help the students to engage, and what you're saying about the objects and then personified, you know, this is the object that you've got emotion attached, and then something that you can create a story with the stuff that students really appreciate and then feel so close to.
Yeah.
Somehow there is some kind of connection. I was just so sparked within me, and I was so happy to hear about this.
Well, I'm very happy. I sparkle some connection, but yes, personalization, it's connected to this. Yeah, it's giving meaning to and bringing, yeah, the personal stories. So yes, there are connections there. So thank you for sharing these, and you can further explore. You know, you have references here. Maybe a good starting point could be reference number 2, David Block, which speaks about second language identities. It's not about you know, techniques to teach, but it's about these ideas of the learner's identities. And then also a very good book is the number 3 from the bottom, Pillar, so intercultural communication. It's taking a little bit this view of intercultural communication.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that your presentation has taken me to a very special place when I used to teach high school in the US. Because in the high school, you know, you had more time to process the topics and then personalize them and do projects that were close to the students. And so thank you so much for that. And I do have to say that when we personalize language, the student actually enjoys learning it. They can connect with the language process in a more natural way. And I think that we tend to be very traditional in the sense that we follow book page by page by page by page, but there's no such thing as a perfect textbook for language learning. And we forget that personal experiences are as much as it's actually more realistic than using a textbook. You know, when I used to teach literature in the high school, Spanish literature, you know, I used to have my students interpret the poem through collages or through painting, so I could see their emotional connection to the poem through their visual observations of what the poem was trying to say. And it's just a beautiful way of teaching languages, and it really inspired me again. And now I just need to figure out how to connect this to undergraduate degree teaching more than language learning.
Yeah.
You know, but it just it took me to a very special place, and the reason why I fell in love with language learning teaching. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And yes, we all fight with the constraint of time, the framework assessment, but you know, you find spaces to do these, or through, you know, the homeworks, or you find, you know, if you want, you find the space to do it. But I agree, you know, when there is the personal, the learning takes a different dimension, becomes deep. It's not just surface learning, but maybe it's not for everybody, but I think so. When you bring the personal, you go to a different dimension of learning.
That's what I was going to say earlier, but there was not time. That I think particularly it's well suited also to transgress academia and go beyond, because obviously, particularly in the undergraduate programs, as you say, we work with very heavily constraints, and then there is the marketization and the transactional component of education. But particularly in these institution-wide language programs where you explore probably a bit more or with less constraints what you do, you have particularly opportunity also then to link it to people outside academia who maybe can connect much better also with objects and through objects and material experiences. Whereas academia very often in higher education is very much about the cognitive and the conceptual.
Yes, thank you, Thomas, for bringing that dimension, because these kind of methodologies, theories, and then application to teaching are transgressive. Yes, there is an element of transgression, and of course you decide if you want to do or how far you want to go. But you are, you know, and all the feminist, post-colonial, post-structural, you know, there is all the idea of, you know, breaking the frame, transgressing, going beyond. And yes, if you do these, there is an element of transgression, which could be also a little, but I think even a little bit of transgression, it's good.
No, I'm all for it. I mean, I did a presentation on transgressing the boundaries a few years ago. It's great. That's why I see lots of potential actually.
Yes. Well, this pedagogy is transgressive. I agree, and that's. Maybe it's not for everybody again. It's
and I also think that allowing the students to see the human side of the instructor is so important. You know, that you know, there's times where students ask a question and I at that exact moment I do not have the answer, and to be able to say, look, I'll come back to you with the answer tomorrow, but and do it, they actually realize, okay, it's okay if I don't know the answer now because I can find it tomorrow. You know, we are teachers, but we don't know absolutely everything, or our brain cannot react 100 miles an hour to respond to something. And allowing them to see your silly side as well as your human side, I think is very important in language learning.
Yes, and also I think to particularly in intercultural studies, to teach kindly, but to teach students to be transgressive, it's important, because you know you teach them to become active citizens, and not just passive receivers of knowledge and of policies or whatever they will do in life, you know. But teaching a little bit of risk taking in the class and transgression, I think it's part of learning, and particularly of intercultural and language learning. And maybe we can finish with the transgressive notes.
Very good. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Thomas.
Thank you,
Donata.
We can carry on our conversation.
Yeah, we'll catch up. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thomas, don't hang up.
Yeah, okay. I'll
perfect.
stay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, Thomas. We will be in touch.
Yes. Well.
Oh, you need to. Oops.
Yeah. And I will add another reference to these slides and then reshare it.
Fine.
With
Yeah. Send or share them anytime.
and
Yeah.
also my email, which I forgot to put, so that
Don't worry. Yeah.
okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'll share it with you later. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
I'm just reading the chat 1 second.
Okay.
Okay.
Actually, I can download the chat. So
I think so. You can, can't you? Yeah.
Yes, so I
And
can.
everything is recorded anyway. If you need anything, I can share the list of participants and everything.
Yeah.
If
you
need it or want it.
Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Adios. Adios.
Yes.